This is chapter 16. Last Wednesday, we looked a little bit at some of chapter 16. So I'll get a running start by starting at the beginning. Exodus chapter 16. They have been in the wilderness now for over a month. In fact, it says in the first verse here that it's the 15th day of the second month. So a month and 15 days, a month and a half since they were redeemed, set free from slavery in Egypt. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around with bucketfuls of meat, pots of meat, and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Well, bless their hearts. God has set them free from slavery. He has provided for their every need, but it is not enough. And there's a word of warning here to us. For an ungrateful person, it is never enough. It doesn't matter how much you do for them or how many blessings they receive, it's not going to be enough. I hope we won't be in the category of ungrateful people. I hope we will give thanks for the Lord's blessings and the things that He has done for us on a moment-by-moment, daily basis. I hope that we will not grumble and complain, but instead will count our blessings and give thanks to the Lord for the blessings He has poured out upon us. So they grumbled against Moses and against Aaron because they happened to be on hand. Who are they really grumbling against? God. And does God hear us when we grumble? He sure does. And so He's thinking, well, I guess that sunset wasn't pretty enough. Or I guess, they didn't really enjoy breakfast this morning. Or, what would God think as He hears us grumble and complain about so many things? Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions." So here God says that He is testing them. He is putting them to a test. And I think you could make the argument that our life here on earth is a test. Are we going to be true? Are we going to be faithful? Are we going to do those things that are right? Are we going to realize that the universe and our lives are about loving relationships and invest in those? Are we going to pass the test? Life is a test. And so here the Lord is testing them to see, are they going to follow His instructions? Now, I don't know how you feel when you get a thingy that has to be put together. There are some of us who immediately just try to do it on our own without looking at anything. Maybe there's a picture on the box. And then sometimes we do dive into the instructions. Our historical marker arrived last week. And so this week we got the pole out of the box. It's a 7-foot pole. And it's supposed to be like a breakaway thing. And I got to thinking, goodness, if you concrete 3 feet in the ground and somebody hits it, I don't think it's going to break away. So that must not be how you're supposed to do it. And turns out it's not. And so I pulled out the instructions and I have no idea what they tell you to do. I sent some to Bobby. I sent some to John Ward. I sent some to Terry Hooser. Those are smart people. I figured if I can't understand it, maybe they can. Whew, I'm glad we got smart people around here. I think we're going to hire somebody. Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, here God is saying, I wonder if they're going to follow well, He's not saying I wonder. He knows. He's going to test them to see if they'll follow His instructions. Why is it important that we follow God's instructions? He knows the very best way for us to live. He made us. He designed us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows where the landmines are. He knows about the things that are going to trip us up and do us in. And unfortunately, we in our pride say, I'm going to do it how I want to do it. I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And we don't pay attention to God's instructions. But it is to our own demise that we don't do that, because God really is intending to help us and to strengthen us. So the people were put to the test, and that word will come up again. Now, where are they? In the desert, in the wilderness, right? Really, what they've got to depend on is God. Fast forward, and the Son of God will be led by the Spirit into the desert, into the wilderness, and there he will be tested. Right? So there's some parallels here that kind of get us ready. Now, I don't want to ruin any surprises, but do these people pass the test? No. Does Jesus pass the test? Yes. Yes, he does. So God says, I'm going to test them. I'm going to see if they follow my instructions. On the sixth day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So every day, gather as much as you need, but on the sixth day, gather twice as much. He'll tell us why in a moment. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but against the Lord. Now, let me pause there for just a moment. Y'all probably don't know anybody that has ever gotten mad at the church. Maybe they felt offended. Maybe somebody said something mean. And it might have been one of these mean folks in the church, because, the church is a hospital for sinners, right? And we're all in need of grace and mercy and forgiveness, and we're all learning how to give mercy and grace and forgiveness. So there might be some legitimate complaint down along the way. But I have noticed in my time on this earth that a lot of times when folks are mad, they're mad at whoever's close by, but you know who they're really mad at? Well, it might be themselves, but they're really mad at God. And Moses points that out to the people. Hey, y'all are grumbling about us, but who are we? You're really grumbling against the Lord. He's heard you. And he's going to feed you. Just wait and see. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. Now, I don't know if you've ever been invited to come and worship before the Lord, but these circumstances are a little bit different. Come because he's heard your complaints. He's heard your grumbling. He's heard what you said. Come before the Lord. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. There's another thing I just feel led to point out to you. These folks were wondering if God had really led them out of Egypt. Question mark, right? But they had seen all the plagues. They'd seen the pillar of fire. They'd seen the cloud by day. They had walked across the Red Sea as God divided the waters. Why would there be any doubt? Yes. And I'd like to say these people are just slow and different. But these people are us. We too. The Lord, we might have a beautiful experience with the Lord on one day, and the next day we're wondering if there is a God, and if there is one, why isn't he fixing stuff around my house? We have short memories, and can get distracted and delayed so easily. And so here they see a visible reminder of God's presence and God's power. The Lord appears in a cloud. The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. And that evening quail came and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, What is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, It is the bread the Lord is giving you to eat. And this is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person that you have in your tent. And the Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. Then Moses said to them, No one is to keep any of it until morning. All right. So God causes bread to fall from heaven, and there's plenty. There is an abundance of bread. It is a supernatural event. I was reading some commentaries today that were trying to explain this in a natural way. And I was scratching my head thinking, how in the world could that many people have that much bread and it not be a supernatural thing? I guess next they're going to try to explain how Jesus took 5 loaves and 12 fishes, and that was a natural thing to feed over 5,000. Supernatural event. God provides. It is sufficient for them. It is sacred. It comes from the Lord, and the Lord will use it to teach them. He will use this bread that He is giving them to teach them spiritual truths that can guide and shape their lives. So 6 days it would fall. You get as much as you need, but you got to eat everything you get, and it's going to be exactly what you need, and don't try to hoard any. Now, why would somebody want to hoard stuff? All right. Now, we're told it's going to fall every morning, right? So if you're trying to hoard stuff or keep it back for the next day, what's causing that to happen? We don't trust. We're not sure. It's not the next day yet. We're not sure how it's going to be provided, and so we feel afraid. And so we're trying to take things into our own hands, quite literally, and we're not trusting God. So our prayer is, give us this day our daily bread, and then, Lord, could you provide some stuff for me to stick back in the corner in case you don't provide tomorrow? Is that what Jesus taught us to pray? No. So this hoarding, this holding on to things comes out of fear and a lack of trust. So I'm sure they paid attention to these instructions and did exactly what God told them to do. Right? Well, look at verse 20. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses, and they kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to stink. So Moses was angry with them. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for each person, and the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever's left and keep it till morning." So they saved it until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Nevertheless, some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather it, but they found nothing. I like the phrase, they paid no attention. They just paid no attention to what Moses had told them. They didn't pay attention to what the Lord said. They just did their own thing, but to their own folly. Now, in the story, we're getting closer to the Ten Commandments. And you remember that one of the Ten Commandments is to honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. But God is training the people. Sue was telling me about puppies, poodles. I guess they were puppies. And she might go back tomorrow and get one. We don't know. But you know, if you're training an animal or that kind of thing, how you do it? Well, repetition's important. Consistency is important, right? A relationship of trust is important. So there are a lot of things that go into that. Here, God is training his people to trust him. So 6 days, the manna will fall. Not going to fall on the seventh day. Seventh day is going to be a day of rest. Now, where did those numbers come from? Creation. God made the world in 6 days, but on the seventh day, he rested. I can remember when the malls, this was back when we had malls and people went to them. Can y'all remember that far back? The malls would not allow Chick-fil-A to be in their mall because Chick-fil-A said from the very beginning they would not be open on Sunday. Are y'all all sad for Chick-fil-A? Are they in terrible financial trouble since they've not opened on Sunday? What's that? It is the busiest place around. Regardless of what time of day you go through, there's a line. But they do get people through pretty efficiently through their lines, right? 2 lines. Okay. Their decision to honor the Lord by not being open on Sunday, has the Lord blessed that? Yeah. Sociologists have done studies. Now, these aren't Christian sociologists. These are just folks trying to figure out what works best with human beings. And you know what they figured out? The very best work schedule for the human body, 6 days on, 1 day off. 6 days on, 1 day off. It's as if God has given us an owner's manual for what will work best for our lives. What are we supposed to do on that seventh day? Well, it's a day of rest. It's a day of worship. It's a day to think about important things. Because I don't know how your life is, but sometimes in the push and shove of getting from point A to point B to point C to point D to point E and not be late for nothing, there's no time to ponder. We need time to ponder. And the Lord knows that. And so one day out of 7, we're supposed to think about important things. Where we come from? Why are we here? What we going to do? Where are we going? Important things. Things that God's Word helps us to understand and the wisdom that comes from Him. And so I know our society has become a 24/7 society, and if you can get a day off, you're lucky. But we are just like these folks back then who just didn't pay any attention, and they didn't pay attention to their own folly, and I'm afraid that describes our culture and society too. Would y'all agree? So, the Lord puts this into place, and He is training them. He is helping them to realize what's going on with it. Well, look at verse 28 is where I stopped. And I got tickled when I read the commentaries on verse 28 because if you look at just the verse in my translation, it looks like God is fussing at Moses. He's not. The word you there is more properly translated y'all. So I'm going to read it that way. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will y'all refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions?" So the you there is plural. That's why I say it should be translated y'all. So he's not fussing at Moses. He's fussing at the situation with the people. How much longer before y'all trust me? How much longer before y'all believe me? How much longer before you start keeping my commandments and paying attention to my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord is giving you the Sabbath, and that is why on the sixth day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the seventh day. No one's to go out. So the people rested on the seventh day. Now, this seventh day thing is going to become pretty important as we move forward. God rested on the seventh day. Was that because he was tired? No, our God is constantly at work. He does not slumber. He does not sleep. He is not in need of rest. So in creation, why did God establish that 6-day, 1-day pattern? Was it for him or for us? It was for us. Now, where are these people going? Well, right now they're on their way to Sinai. But eventually they're going to be on their way to the promised land, right? A land that God would show them, a land flowing with milk and honey. And sometimes in the narrative, it'll say they're on their way to the promised land. Who will go with me? There's a hymn like that, isn't there? But sometimes it says they're on their way to the land of Canaan. It's another word for it, but the word I'm looking for is the word rest. The land of rest. And think about this. They've been moving around in tents. Y'all, there's a lot of work to setting out a tent, packing up the tent, moving the tent, setting up the tent, packing up the tent, moving the tent. One of these days, they're going to get somewhere where they ain't got to have tents. They can build a house and live in it. So they thought of this promised land as a land of rest. Jesus will pick up on this theme in the New Testament, and he'll say, "Come to me, all you who labor and weary." And what's he going to give them? Rest. He's going to give them rest. And the preacher in Hebrews picks up on this theme, and he says, hey, it was talking about rest here in the Old Testament, but even after the journey out of Egypt, the psalmists and others kept talking about rest. There's something else out there for us. There is an eternal rest where we can finally be at home with the Lord. And that's what we need to be working toward. That's what we need to be living for, is this rest that God's providing. So Exodus lays the foundation for some pretty powerful theological thoughts that will carry us all the way through Scriptures. Well, the people of Israel called the bread manna, because that sounds like, in Hebrew, what is it? Manna. That's what they called it. It was white like coriander seed, and it tasted like wafers made with honey. So the commentaries I read said that they had an oil and honey kind of taste, and depending on whether you baked it or boiled it or stewed it, different flavors would kind of come out that way. And so I don't know if y'all have any good recipes for different ways to cook manna, but they had to, right, to have some variety in the bread that the Lord provided. And this is what the Lord commanded: take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt. So Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put an omer of manna in it, then place it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come. And then verse 34 points to some things that are going to happen in the future. Because as you know, Moses is going to come down with Sinai with these commandments. They're going to build a place to put the commandments. And what else is going to be in that container? This jar of manna. And they're going to call it the Ark of the Covenant. So we get our first inclination of that here. As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna with the tablets of the covenant law so that they might be preserved. The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to the land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. And then it tells us that an omer is 1/10 of a ephah. That's good. That's good. You'd be exceptional, though, Sue, if you didn't grumble. But think about it. It's the food, it's the bread of the angels. It is bread that comes from heaven, right? Jesus will pick up on that theme, and he'll say, your forefathers ate bread from heaven in the wilderness, but they all died. I am the living bread that has come from heaven, and he who eats of this bread will never die. I am the bread of life. And so the manna in the wilderness points us to the true supernatural gift, the true gift that will satisfy and fulfill us, the true gift that sanctifies and is sacred for us, and that's Jesus Christ our Lord. So manna prepares us for Jesus. And we won't get tired of Jesus after 40 years or eternity. Well, the next story brings us right on back to these people and their personalities. Chapter 17, the whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And Moses replied, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? All right, so the Lord tested them, and now they're putting the Lord to the test. But the people were thirsty for water, and they grumbled against Moses, and they said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst? Does this begin to sound familiar to y'all? Yeah. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, what am I going to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me. The Lord answered Moses, go out in front of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you at the rock of Horeb. Strike the rock. Water will come out of it for the people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So the place is named Grumbling and Testing. I don't know if y'all want to go vacation there or not. It doesn't sound like a very pleasant place. Moses names the places that they were based on the bad behavior that they experienced there from the people. The people demanded God's provision. The people questioned God's protection. And the people doubted God's presence. Now, I tried to make this point a little bit ago, and I got sidetracked, I think. But these people had seen God's presence in such a powerful way, and yet they still doubted. What if God wrote in the sky, hey, Sam, I exist. I created you. Trust me. What do y'all think Sam would do? Well, he might. There are some people that would look at that and think, okay, well, I guess I better. Are there people, though, that would look at that and then go on living exactly how they wanted to live and pay no attention to it at all? Yes. So the real issue is not miracles. The real issue is our hard, stubborn heart. And even the supernatural things don't always break through our hard, stubborn hearts. And these people, they doubted even God's presence. And so God tells Moses to strike the rock with his staff. Now, I point that out to you because later on in the story, this is going to get Moses in trouble. Does Moses have a temper? He does. And he will lose his temper it's going to create a lot of problems. But in this situation, he's obedient and he follows the Lord and he strikes the rock. And what happens when he strikes the rock? Water comes out. Living water. Water from the Lord. Now, again, the commentaries I read were trying to explain this by natural things, and they were talking about how rocks do have a certain amount of moisture in them or that kind of thing. And I'm thinking, okay, but to feed this, to have this many people be able to have something to drink, yeah, I don't think so. He strikes the rock, and there's enough water to feed the multitudes that comes out. We keep reading in our Bibles. We get to Paul's letter to the church at Corinth. And Paul will reference these people who grumbled and complained, and he said, y'all don't be like them. Learn from their mistakes. And he'll tell part of this story. And in the process of telling part of this story, this is 1 Corinthians 10, in case you want to look at it. In the process of telling this story, he'll say, and that rock that the water came out of, that rock was Christ. So Paul tells us that Christ is the one who provides for the people in the Old Testament, just as he's the one who provides for us right here and right now. That water was Christ, Paul says. So the people, hard-hearted, stubborn, quarreled and tested the Lord. And trouble came. More trouble came. They just thought they had trouble. Look at the next verse, verse 8. The Amalekites came, and they attacked the Israelites. So God had protected them from the Egyptians, but now the Amalekites came. Now, you might be asking, and rightly so, who are the Amalekites? Well, they're their distant cousins. And I don't know if y'all have ever fought with your distant cousins, but it can get rough. They are descendants of Esau. You remember Abraham had a son named Isaac. Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. So these Amalekites are descendants of Esau, and they will cause trouble for the Israelites through most of their history. In fact, Herod the Great, who set out to kill the Christ child, he has Amalekite blood. So it's a continuing issue all the way through the scriptures. These are folks who will set themselves in opposition to the people of God and try to mess them up at every turn. So they attack them. Moses says to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And as long as Moses was holding up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till sunset. So Joshua overcame the Amalekites' army with the sword. Oh, wow. What an incredible picture here. As long as Moses has his arms raised, they're going to win. What's the trouble? Yeah, you can't stay in that position forever or all day. So Moses' arms would get tired, and when he began to bring his arms down, the battle would turn, right? What do Aaron and Hur do? Well, they fix a place for him to sit. That turned out to be important. How old is Moses? 80. Moses is 80 years old at this point in the story. And then they come alongside him and hold up his arms. So who won the victory? Trick question. The Lord. Who helped? All right, Joshua and the Israelites' army. And who else? You got Moses. He's doing his part. But you also got Aaron and Hur. What spiritual lesson could we draw from that? Is it important that we support each other? That we lift each other up when we're weak? That we pray on behalf of each other when we're too confused or too upset to pray the way we should? Do we need each other? Yeah. Moses needed Aaron. He needed her. And that's the only way the whole community could win the victory, is for them to support and encourage and strengthen each other. It's the only way we will win a victory as well. It's kind of what I want to preach on Sunday. I might just, remind us of this story. I don't know. Because some of the people that are there on Sunday might not be here tonight. I don't know. Well, the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears it, because I will completely blot out the name of Amalekite from under heaven. Now, he hadn't done that yet, and he won't do that for a good while. Why does he tell Joshua to write it down? Or he tells them to write down on a scroll and make sure Joshua sees it. Joshua is going to succeed Moses down the way, so it's important that he have this information and know where it is. But you'll notice a pattern. This is the first instance, but as we keep reading, there'll be a lot of things that will need to be recorded. We have short memories. And so God says, hey, this is going to be a way for you to remember the victory, to remember the things that happened here today. And Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." He said, because his hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord will be at war with the Amalekites from generation to generation. That phrase there is a weird phrase in Hebrew. We're not sure how to translate it. It sounds weird the way the NIV chose, because his hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord. And I've got a little footnote there that just says the meaning of this Hebrew is uncertain. But we can see enough to know Moses' hands are lifted up toward heaven. So what is Moses doing as he is holding this staff in the air? He is praying. Yes, he is communing with God. And lifted hands is a prayer posture. And so that's what's going on here. He is lifting up his arms. He's lifting up his hands toward the throne of God. So Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." There used to be a song in my childhood, "His banner over me is love." Y'all ever seen any war movies? Usually they got a flag. And often in the war movies, whoever's carrying that flag doesn't make it too long, and somebody else has to pick up the flag and carry it a little further, and somebody else has to pick up the flag and carry it a little further that way. But our banner is the Lord. He's the one who has called us together. He's the one that we rally around. He's the one that leads us forward. Our banner is the Lord. Thank you for taking time out of your week to come and study God's Word together. If the Lord tarries, we'll start at chapter 18 next week. I thank you for your attention and pray that we can learn not to grumble and complain, and that we can learn to really depend on the Lord. Because I'll tell you, He's good to us, and we need to give thanks. Father, thank you for your word. Bless us.